And now, get ready for our much-anticipated General Counsel Roundtable with an array of attorneys from some of the world's leading brands and corporations. Please welcome Janet Y. Bivens, General Counsel and Corporate Secretary, Anuvia Nutrients. Tiffany Merriweather, Chief Legal Officer and Corporate Secretary, Enjoy Technology. Karen Temple, General Counsel, Motion Picture Association of America. Kate Adams, Senior Vice President and General Counsel, Apple.
Wow, I just have to say, this is my first time, not at CCWC, but it's my first time presenting on this main stage, and just looking out at all of these beautiful faces is just giving me so much energy. It's actually calming my nerves a bit. You all look... Thank you. Thank you for all of your support. I, for the past several years, have been at CCWC, but actually in a different capacity than I am now. I'm now a partner at Hogan Lovells, and I focus on investigations, compliance, and crisis management work. But actually before this, I was in-house for several years at a big global media technology company. And so I feel like I'll always be an honorary member of the in-house bar. And so happy to be hosting this particular panel, given my personal background. So thank you all for being here. We did brief intros, and many of us obviously know about your brands and your organizations, but I thought I'd pass it over to each of you to just talk a little bit about your role, your organization, and also for purposes of our discussion, maybe talk about your law department, like the size of your law department. Give folks a scope of, your organization and your leadership. Kate.
Great. Well, I am so happy to be here. Actually be in a place with people, with wonderful people who've dressed up and they're not in their jammies. And it's so fabulous to be back. And I did this panel in Chicago a couple of years ago, and we at Apple hadn't really been super involved in CCWC before that, and Lori said, would you come do the panel? And I was so blown away by the energy level and the passion and just everybody that was there and how much you were getting out of it and the questions. And I came storming back to Cupertino saying, we're missing a huge opportunity. We're gonna do everything we can to get really involved in CCWC going forward. And so thank you for having me back. And we have a lot of Apple people here, and we're really, really glad to be part of this. Yeah, let's stand up, gang. Let's show the... So I'll keep it brief. I mean, a lot of you probably know a lot about my company, maybe even more than I do. We have about 1,400 people in our organization in legal and global security, and we've got a wonderful complement of them here, as you saw, and we're just so glad to be part of CCWC, so thank you.
Thank you. My name is Tiffany Merriweather. I'm the Chief Legal Officer and Corporate Secretary of Enjoy Technology. We are currently a startup. We have some very exciting news, so please check your press releases for Enjoy Technology. There will be some interesting things happening over the next few weeks here. I oversee a team of 10 people covering both legal and compliance globally. We are a company that is focused on commerce at home, reinventing it. We bring the store to the door and through the door and provide a great customer service experience.
Thank you.
Hello, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. My name is Karen Temple. I am the Global General Counsel of the Motion Picture Association. We are a trade association that represents the interests of the 6 major film, television, and streaming studios, such as Netflix, Disney. As a trade association, we aren't on the business side, but our focus is on advocating on behalf of our members in terms of legislation that they might need in order to make sure that their content is able to thrive. We also have a very thriving content protection team, which is the team that does report up to our legal department, my department, which really goes out to help protect the content online. And we also have a sister organization called the Alliance for Creativity and Entertainment, or ACE, which includes 30 other organizations and companies around the world who are content companies, where we do content protection for them. And we have Amazon, for example, and our most recent member is Apple TV Plus, who just joined ACE. So that's what we do. Thank you.
Hello, I'm Janet Bivens. You can call me Jan. I am with Anuvia Plant Nutrients. We are a relatively new company, started really about 4 years ago. We take organic waste and we then make it into a bio-based fertilizer. So generally, we are a fertilizer company. My staff is me. I am as the general counsel, and you as my outside counsel. That's it. So
We'd like to hear that.
So right now, as I said, we're growing, and we are continuing to increase. Right now, I think we have fewer than 100. I think we're at 97 employees total. 19 of those employees are at headquarters. Everyone else is at our plant site in the manufacturing end of it. But remember, Anuvia Plant Nutrients, fertilizer.
Thank you so much for those introductions. And I was thinking about this panel and the wide variety of organizations that you represent, everything from your, Fortune 5 or maybe 3 mega global company to Enjoy Technology, which is a startup with some things, going forward, and then your trade association organization and privately held company with Janet, and thinking about all the different ways that you all might be thinking on returning of work, and your organizations that you lead, and how that's going. In conversations I've had with people here, there's been a variety of thoughts, to say the least, about returning to work. I think some of us have dates set. Some of us are, thinking we might be in a hybrid environment, and some people are like, well, no, I'm never going back. And what is the impact that has, those different models, specifically on diverse women attorneys, and what are some of the ways that you're thinking about that going forward in this pandemic that it sounds like we're going to be with for some time? Kate, why don't you start us off?
Sure. It's a big topic, and I'm guessing for many people, and those of you that follow Apple, there's been a lot of coverage of our return to work efforts, and it is a really complicated subject. I'll just tell you where we are in terms of our plan for now, but we are always having to evolve our thinking based on fundamentally protecting everybody's health. I mean, that's our red line. We're not going to do things that we don't think can protect people's health, including not just people that work for us, but their families, people that they would come into contact with. So, but what we're struggling with is the need to maintain our culture, which is I think it's the most important thing that the company has, actually, while also recognizing that people want a different balance between in-office and out-of-office. And so we've embraced what we're calling 3-2, which is 3 days in, 2 days out, and we're trying to make those 3 days in the same 3 days. I actually think for a lot of people in this audience, be you in a law firm or in a company, that's actually really beneficial in many ways, because I have noticed over time that people that are fully remote, I think it's harder to make the connections and the relationships within the organization. And if you already have, some of the disadvantages we're all well familiar with, in addition to that, I think it is important to create time to be with people, but also recognize that we need more flexibility also. And the balance we've struck is this 3-2 concept. I know it's not perfect. I mean, there's just, and I don't think there is perfection. I have to say, I think being fully remote, at least in a place that's a relationship-driven environment, which is the kind of environment that we have, is a disadvantage. And so, and everybody has their own perspective, and you have your own personal needs and challenges and issues that you need to deal with. But just looking at it on a macro level, for the best engagement for the most people, I do think time in the office together is really critical for career building and relationship building and personal development. And I know our CEO feels the same way about that. I fully respect, though, that there's other paths that different organizations are taking. So we can come back to more on this, but that's just sort of to lay out how we've been thinking about that dichotomy.
Karen, what about you and your organization? How are you thinking about return to office?
I think, like Kate, it's a really complex issue. We are going to the 3-2 as well, where we'll be 3 days in the office and 2 days telework permanently. We're still deciding when that's going to take place. Every month we seem to announce a new return to work date, and then something happens and we have to change. I do think it's really complex, because even for women, there are advantages and disadvantages based on your unique circumstance. For me, it actually was somewhat of an advantage. I have a 13-year-old daughter, so she's kind of, on her independent. And now I have my own space in my basement that I finally remodeled to have an office. So actually the flexibility of being able to telework a little bit more, go down, have dinner with her, but then, come back and continue to do work, it was good for me. I think some people who have younger children, it's a little bit harder. It was also good for me because we have offices both, I'm based in DC, but my legal staff is actually based in Los Angeles. And so before I was going to have to go back and forth, I was planning on spending at least 1 week a month in LA, maybe 2 weeks. And, I was concerned that I would be disadvantaged because my colleagues in LA would be able to have that FaceTime, but we all had kind of the same even-handed Zoom interaction now for the past year, so that's actually allowed me to get to know my colleagues in LA, I think, in a way I might not have been. So it's just interesting that, even among women, there are unique circumstances as to what makes telework work for you or not work for you. And it's really difficult to, I think, find that right balance. And seeing if the 3-2 is that right balance, I think, is something that will be important for us as companies to do, and really listen to our staff and employees and say, this is the current policy, but we're prepared to adjust as things move forward, either for health reasons or for just reasons of flexibility or efficiency as we get back to the office.
Yeah, that's that it's going to be, like you said, maybe a moving target as we go forward. One of the things I think about in my practice area is an investigations and compliance lawyer. I deal with subsidiaries and companies that are international, and so a large part of my practice has always been remote, because the people that I interact with, doing investigations, even through this period, has been remote. Not because of COVID, but just because of the global nature of the practice. And so I know, Tiffany, your role in Enjoy Technology is kind of a remote first thinking, not because of COVID, but just because of the way that business operates. Can you talk us a little bit about that?
Sure. So why don't I start with kind of talking about where we are as a company and where I believe we are going. So you were right, Shalita, we are a remote-first company. I'd never heard of anything like that before interviewing and joining the company, but effectively it means that employees can work anywhere they'd like to work as long as they get their job done. And so I joined, right? And so I am the CLO. I am based in New York. Our headquarters is in Palo Alto. Our CFO, he is in Chicago. Our Chief Administrative Officer is in Florida. Our CEO is in California. So that is the proof that this really is the model, and it wasn't just a one-off for me. And we are really looking at implementing the same throughout our organization. We are allowing people to move if they desire to move. There are some conversations, of course, around pay, and I think that's a topic that many of us have been, discussing. How do you pay people should they decide to move? Do you base it on the market where they live, or do you base it on the market they transition from? So I think that's a larger discussion, but that's where we are today. We have had these kind of monthly conversations, like most companies, about whether there will be any form of returning to work. And I think where we have landed is that we will allow for employees to come into the office once a week on a Wednesday to get that collaboration to maintain the company culture. Otherwise, the office is seen as a resource that you can take part of if you'd like to. Otherwise, you can stay home and do your work and use Zoom or whatever other online channels you'd like. So that's where we are as a company. And what I think Shalita might have been getting at is kind of, for me, what was the impact of starting a new role? I started in April as a CLO remotely. I met my boss for the first time last week in person. So challenging in some ways, but what I will say is that, but for this opportunity to do this whole process remotely, I don't know if I'd be in this role today. So, remote work for me has opened up opportunities, so I view it very favorably. As I'm hiring for my team, I'm looking at remote candidates, and of course that means I now have the world open up to me in terms of talent, in terms of, thinking about hiring diverse talent, because I'm hiring from literally everywhere and not limited to Palo Alto. And I will layer on top of that I do believe that the transition into the company was slightly easier because I was dealing with personal things, family illness, having to travel, and so I was able to juggle multiple priorities while still onboarding and coming on with that immediate credibility.
Thanks, Tiffany. And we're going to circle back to kind of transitioning roles in this environment in a moment. I want to turn it over to Jan, who's also in a remote work environment, and how does that play out for you?
And I was hired in a remote environment. So I'm out of Delaware. The company is based in Winter Garden, Florida. I love it. I love it for a number of reasons. Mainly it's because I can continue my life every day, but also making sure that I'm getting the work done and getting the quality product that's necessary. And that's actually what's accepted from everyone in the company. We have all three different types going. We have the hybrid, and we have those who travel in. The CFO travels in, and he's there as needed. The CFO is there as needed. Is that better? Yeah. Okay, thanks. And the CEO, she's there every day. And I do have did you hear me say she? The CEO is there every day, and she's local. But then everyone else, as needed, will be on site or at the manufacturing site. The director of operations and those in charge of operations are definitely more local. But I come in for at least prior to the pandemic, I would come in for the board meetings because I'm corporate secretary, as well as for our leadership team meetings, which are monthly. Then I stopped coming in, and most of them stopped traveling for the leadership team meetings until maybe about 6 months ago. I actually started returning in June. And I found it very helpful to me to be there, just because you do need that interaction. You do need those one-on-one, that FaceTime, to discuss with them what's going on and their needs for me, to make sure that I'm properly supporting, but not only that, to get a gauge from them. And as we've already always know, you want to be in the room where it happens. So when you're on the other end of that Zoom and that webinar, you don't necessarily get the same sense that you get when you're sitting right there at the table with them. But we do enjoy all three different models.
Can I add something, Shalita? Just
Absolutely.
on the legal department, I do think the one thing that you potentially miss by not being in the office with everyone is that, for the in-house counsel, a lot of times there are departments that don't love going to the legal department and asking for permission. They usually ask for forgiveness afterwards, and you might, not find out until you hear on, as you're walking down the hall or, having coffee with somebody that, some department is doing one thing or there's something going to be pushed out and did legal look at it? And I think that, you have to make sure as an in-house counsel that you maintain that informal communication as well, because it's much less easy to find out what might be happening, and if somebody forgot that, hey, this, multi-million-dollar contract, we forgot to send it through legal. I mean, not that that's ever happened at any company that I've ever worked at, but, I think that that's one thing you potentially do miss is that informal kind of advice that an in-house counsel, person will often provide, as opposed to just that formal, having the meetings.
Yeah. No, that's really interesting. And, we've talked a lot about work-life balance, specifically for women. Obviously, many of us are caretakers in a number of respects, whether it be, child care, elder care, just family obligations in general. Specific for, diverse women and this audience, thinking through how these policies impact that group. It was alluded to on an earlier panel that there have been some conversations around women of color in particular feeling that there are benefits to being remote because you don't have to do the face-to-face bullying, harassment, microaggressions, the things that many of us have experienced in our careers, not having to deal with it as much on a day-to-day basis. And so that also, in addition to the work-life balance point, driving the desire for some to continue to work remotely. And obviously there's pros and cons to that, right? Maybe you're not triggered on a daily basis by these things, but also, as someone had mentioned earlier, you're already invisible in many instances, and so that doesn't really help for, if you're ducking that. So I just wonder what your thoughts are about that specific to women and diverse women who have faced these types of issues being physically present at work and, that being a factor into why they prefer remote work. Anyone?
As someone, again, who works remotely, I do see the downside to that. I definitely see the fact that me being in their presence and having those private conversations, the days I go in, I try to make sure that I do make myself available for whatever issue we might have. And then I always learn there's something I don't know about. So it is good to be there for that reason, but I have not faced the bullying or harassment that many of my friends in other corporations have experienced. So I can't speak to that issue. I do believe, however, that organizations such as CCWC empowers us to be able to work together to overcome those issues. So it is great that we're here, and again, thank you, Lori, for the invitation. It's great that we're here once again to just tackle whatever we need. I don't know about you, but you come here, don't you feel rejuvenated?
Yes, absolutely.
And ready to go out and face the world. And so to that end, has anybody else had to deal with it? And if so, how did you deal with it?
Maybe because I made the comment in the first round on, the challenge I see, and I think a lot of this isn't a one-size-fits-all situation. I mean, so much depends on the culture of your company or your organization, and what are the characteristics of that environment, and how does that then feed into the being in the office versus remote versus the hybrid. I can say that I think in many bigger corporate environments I've been into for 25 years, Honeywell and now Apple, that I think in those environments a woman of color or even women, white women being fully remote, if other people are in the office, is a disadvantage. I think in those settings. Now that doesn't mean in other settings that it's the same thing, but I think because of the invisibility issues that were mentioned and the fact that you already have to fight to have a full seat at the table anyway, to be the person on video while other people are in the room is really, I think, a very negative dynamic. And And so if you're in if you're in a world where it is a 3-2 or whatever balance is struck, I think that being fully remote in that environment, I think, is going to be a career inhibitor in most instances. And again, there's always the corner case where a different set of considerations apply. But just sort of looking at it writ large, I do feel that when I look around at where people create those connections and how those connections help them do their work better, and then that feeds on itself, and then another opportunity comes along. It's just hard to do that on video, especially if other people are in person. So so if you're in an environment like Apple where the culture really does matter and the relationships matter, I do think the hybrid is the best balance, recognizing none of them are perfect, and that I would recommend to our people in our organization that they come in on those 3 days and get the most out of that.
And I'd just add, again, I think it's such a complicated issue and so unique to individuals. I mean, I am personally a big believer in self-care, and how it is important to kind of listen to yourself and your body. So there might be instances where you say, this is, if you're dealing with bullying, or I do need to take advantage, even though most people are in the office. To have more telework, because I need that time, and I'm not going to be as efficient as I otherwise would be because of the bullying or whatever. I think that also will give you time to, quite frankly, assess whether you want to be in that company at all. Because if you're in a company or organization where you can't feel that you can go into the office 3 days a week because of the atmosphere, that is also a sign to you as to whether that company is supportive enough of you as an individual. But I do think it is kind of unique, so you balance it. I might not be as productive, I might not get that face time, but to get through the week or the month or the year, maybe I do need to telework a little bit more. But again, I think what Kate said in terms of just that informal interaction, you do lose that. We talk about people, I think old stories of, partners and others, males, making, deals or discussions in the bathroom, where obviously we're not going to be there, or on the golf course. And so, you're going to lose that already if because you're not going to have access to those areas. And then potentially you might lose it a little bit more in terms of, around the water cooler or getting coffee. But I do think it is something that each individual has to consider for themselves and really assess, because at the end of the day, the company is the company, and they're not going to care about you as much personally as you are going to care about you. So it's important for you to assess what will allow you to be your best self wherever you are.
Yeah, agree. And I think it's also taking some accountability and thinking about how you can mitigate, right? If you're not in the office, then what can you do to create situations and encounters and build that same connection with your business partners, with your team members? So maybe it means you setting up your own coffees or calls or chats, or being willing to meet outside of the office if you avail yourself of that remote work. That's my best advice, and I do that even though I am permanently remote, because I do recognize that connection is very important to being able to do my job effectively.
I use the word bullying, which may have been kind of an aggressive example on one side of the spectrum. But even just the way that you present, especially as a diverse woman in a room in person versus on a video. And so, personal anecdote, I started my current role at Hogan during COVID. And so all of my partner interviews were remote, regardless of whether they were in the same office. I'm in the DC office, but even with the DC management, I had remote interviews. Compared to my in-house role, which was 7 years ago now, I walked into the room, I had to be interviewed by the C-suite, which is an all-white male C-suite. And so that's a different type of experience of just onboarding and how you feel and exist with other people, especially when you're the only, which I was for most of the time I was in my role. And And so there can be slight differences in that. And Tiffany, I know you had the experience as well of starting a new role during this time, and wondering how you think that may have impacted just even the way people perceive you in person versus over, a video. And would that have maybe had an impact on, getting the role or moving forward through the process?
Sure. So you're right. I met with our CEO. Essentially, everyone I interviewed with, including the board, was remote. I then started remotely. And what I will say is that, and this is probably true for anyone who's experienced microaggressions, many of us have for any number of reasons, you brace yourself. Or I will say I brace myself, right? I think that's just a natural defense mechanism that we all have. And I do believe that the opportunity to start remotely just made me feel more comfortable and not have that angst. So I was able to come in. I mentioned the instant credibility before. I think it's still true here. People knew who I was. There weren't, maybe people were sizing me up, but if they were, I didn't see it. And I was able to really come in and focus and do my job. And then when I met people in person, right, they already had this perception of me that I was the best thing ever. And so for me, it worked. That may not be true for everybody, but that's my story.
You know how you come into the room and you walk in the room and you look around? We had like one of these long tables, and you just look around the long table, and all you see is a sea of, mostly white male faces, maybe a couple of white female faces. But that's an experience, right? Especially when you are going for an opportunity, or, having an opportunity to present maybe in front of a certain group. That's a different experience than, doing it on video, where some people even have their cameras off. I was at a media technology company, we were required to have our cameras on. We can have a whole panel about cameras on, cameras off, I think. But, it's a different type of onboarding, a different type of dynamic that I think, for those of us who have been in the room and had those very physical kind of reactions to being in those rooms, it can, psych you out a little bit sometimes. And so it is different, knowing that someone maybe isn't looking me up and down, right, sizing you up, so to speak, than doing it virtually. So I think that there's, again, no right answer, but just pros and cons in different ways that it plays out specifically for diverse women. I wanted to pivot a little bit, because we've talked a lot about in-house, to our outside counsel friends, since so many of us, including myself, are curious about this dynamic and what it means for us trying to provide you all with excellent service and what your expectations are. There have been, companies have taken different approaches. Some may expect my outside counsel to be in the office if I'm in the office, right? Some maybe don't really care as long as the service level is, meeting expectations. And so I just want to get your thoughts on, how do you perceive working with outside counsel kind of as we go forward into these hybrid work models? What can we do?
I'll take, as someone who really depends a great deal on all outside counsel, I just need you to be accessible, responsive, deliver the excellent product that you always would deliver, and to make me look good too. I mean, that's part of the deal, right? I need you to help support me so I can support the company, and I can also help support you in your role within your firm. Now, it's not always easy because, of course, the court systems have been down, and so timeliness is an issue, trying to get back, but I just need you to be the go-getter that you can be to get the response that's necessary so that we can continue the business that we're in.
Great. What about anyone else? Does anyone want their counsel to come see them? I was surprised because I got a request from a client that they actually wanted to do like an in-person working session. And I said, oh my goodness, you do? What do you all think about? Like, are you wanting that, expecting that?
I mean, it might depend on the particular issue. You know, is it a deal? Is it litigation? You know, or is it witness prep, for example, which maybe is better, or deposition prep, which I would, I haven't done recently, but I think it's probably better to do in person than try to do it over the phone or Zoom, unless the deposition is going to be, remote as well. So I think it might be unique to the particular circumstance. I personally wouldn't care where they were. I think, just like was said, as long as the work product is done. And I was actually hoping that, as a person who, came out of a law firm, that the added flexibility, especially for women and women of color, would increase the retention rates in law firms. And that, again, that the ability to be able to work all night, but work all night and take a break to have, dinner with your kids or your family or whatever, is something that would allow you to be able to stay in that type of environment where a lot of us have, left because, we had to have a better work-life balance. So hopefully, a lot of firms or corporations are supportive of that, and that will actually have a real world impact on retention in outside counsel firms as well.
That's a great point. Kate?
Yeah, I think it's an interesting one. I don't know how many of you followed the coverage of a letter that General Counsel of Morgan Stanley sent to the firms, representing the bank. And I think it was kind of misrepresented, or at least that's what he says now. But the gist of it seemed to be, we're in the office, you need to be in the office.
I think that's the message a lot of
certainly that's
outside counsel received.
That's how, I think that's, yeah, whatever he meant, that's certainly how people responded to it. And so I think it's going to be interesting to watch what happens here. I think there's probably firms where people have been back working in the office for a while, like they have, and you think about airlines, and there's a lot of companies, businesses that are back at work kind of as if there wasn't a pandemic because of the nature of their business or policy decisions they've made. And, I could see how for them they might want to go back to the norms of working with outside counsel that existed before. Our view, Apple's view, is that it's really up to the law firm to make the decisions about how the firm policy about what the firm is going to do here. And if the firm thinks fully remote is going to be successful, great. That said, there is certain work. For example, we had a rather notorious 6-week trial in Oakland this spring, and guess what? We were all in Oakland for 6 weeks, including me. So, that's just what the work demanded. Witness prep had to be in person because it was an in-person trial, and we need to get people comfortable. Being grilled and having the judge in the, mock judge in the room, and, the work demanded it. We had COVID tests every day. I mean, we did all the stuff that we're doing here to make it happen. So I think it, as pointed out, it's very situational. I don't think it's appropriate for us to micromanage the firms, but I do think there's going to be times when the work demands togetherness or in-person activity, and that's just what it is. It's the lot we've chosen, I guess, by being lawyers. But beyond that, I think, it's really should be up to the firms, and I hope that they think about retention and the ability to make the work-life balance better for particularly the women members of the firm, so that we don't have the attrition that we always see at the firms.
Yeah, my view here is that if I've trusted you enough to engage you, to do work on behalf of the company, right, and to represent us, then I'm going to trust you to manage your employees and to know what's best for them while also keeping my business. And that's just my stance.
So if you don't have mandates on your outside counsel and where they have to be, what about even just guidelines around how you want to interact? Because one of the things that I was thinking through trying to plan my in-person meeting was just, obviously COVID, who do you, hopefully people are vaccinated. That's not a political view. That's just my scientific personal opinion. But you're doing these meetings. You want to make them as safe and as best as possible. It's easy if the client has a policy or a guideline that says everyone on your team needs to meet this criteria in order to come to this meeting or work on this project, and then I can pass that along and say, here's the requirements that you have to meet without having to get into the diciness of whether you are, whether you aren't, and, who to put on the matter and potentially trip over some sort of, privacy or other issues. And so are you providing that type of guidance? Because I think a lot of outside counsel, when you get these type of requests, you start going down that rabbit hole thinking, okay, how do I do this logistically? Have you all thought about that?
There's certain guidelines that I had to draft regarding, especially if they were on the plant site. I mean, there's just certain dictates that had to occur. Mm-hmm. Now, if you're at the headquarters, it was not as governed as strictly, but it's trusted that everyone has taken the proper protections before they walk in the door. Mm-hmm. So when there were very few circumstances where I did need outside counsel to come in to the office, sign some paperwork, or get something filed for us. And they were probably more protected from their environment even, and their culture from the firm, than the actual headquarters for the company. So they came in and were properly masked up and everything. So.
What about the other way around, right? Obviously, we're not going to ask our clients, are you vaccinated? Don't come to the office if you're not. But, we also, as outside counsel have guidelines. Obviously, the firms have guidelines about people coming into the office. And especially a lot of clients, I think, haven't returned. I think a lot of law firms continue to work in a different way than companies. I think, many of you all have not returned to the office, so to speak, in the same way. And so just being able to receive our guidelines and not be offended, frankly, that's also something that we've kind of been thinking through. How do you manage that on the client side?
I think everyone agrees that you are in charge of the firm is in charge of its employees.
Right.
So we would need to respect whatever your guideline would be if we're asking you to come and meet with us.
And a lot of the guidelines, will depend on, the OSHA guidelines of the various state. And so if there's a mask mandate, the clients are going to be expected to comply with the mask mandate. We haven't opened yet, but yeah, we have a 30-page list of guidelines that we're considering. And, it gets sensitive, from us as well, because, a lot of we're lobbyists and advocates. So yes, do you ask that senator to show proof of vaccination or a mask before he comes into the office?
Do you want that bill passed?
Depends on the state.
But you do have requirements that the city is going to mandate for you as well. So I think it requires diplomacy and sensitivity. I think often on both ends.
Yes, absolutely agree. This panel is going really quickly, and I didn't mention this before, but if you have questions, because it's very rare to have a distinguished panel like this and just be able to kind of go at it and ask your questions, please get those ready. I don't know if there's mics or stands available, but before we kind of close out, I wanted to talk a little bit about talent and how you're thinking about talent in this moment, given this conversation about remote and hybrid working. And I think, frankly, a lot of organizations are feeling the pressure of, the talent drain, and people have options now. Right, more options than they had before, especially given the remote environment. And so how is that impacting, the way you think about talent, where you look for talent? Are you still kind of, predisposed to maybe want someone who's going to be able to do that hybrid 2-3 in the office and be physically present? Or are you maybe looking or tapping into other areas that maybe you wouldn't have before, especially, from the diversity angle? A lot of places are just not diverse geographically, right? And so that has always been a challenge when you're doing kind of focused on local recruiting, but being able to tap into geographies where, okay, maybe this person doesn't want to move into this all-white environment, but they do, they have the skills, they're, qualified for the role. Are you thinking about that? And do you think that will maybe improve the diversity in your organizations or in your industry, generally speaking?
So I've already talked about this a little bit. I'm hiring, and I'm hiring anywhere and everywhere I can find.
Did y'all hear she's hiring?
Talented
if anybody,
candidates.
Y'all heard that? Okay.
But what I will say is that I do think that that openness to hiring outside of Palo Alto or New York, where I live, requires me as a manager and as a leader to think about engagement and how I will facilitate that, and also career development and how I will facilitate that for that employee. So you should do it for every employee, but I do think in light of the disconnect that's going to be natural because of location, there's some extra stuff that I think we have to do as leaders and as managers when we do open the door to remote working in geographic locations outside of where we are based.
I have a question from our portal friends. Shannon Stokes said that she would like you all to talk about your transition to a new organization in a senior role. So if you could repeat that question and someone can talk about that.
Yeah. So the question is around, I don't know if that was specific to kind of COVID or just generally wanting to understand more from the panel. Yeah, how did you transition into the role that you got now? We kind of skipped over bios in the beginning because we just have so many, long and distinguished histories, but maybe you can, if you had to briefly kind of sum up how you transitioned into your senior role. Kate, would you kick us off?
Yeah, sure. So I have been at Apple now almost 4 years, and so the transition that I made most recently was from being the general counsel of Honeywell, which is also a Fortune 100, but it's an industrial B2B company. A lot of technology, but it's very much an industrial company, to Apple, which is obviously a consumer products-driven company. And I'll say it wasn't, I'm not going to, pretend it was easy, because it wasn't. I mean, I had a lot of experience as a general counsel, but the biggest challenge I think you face if you're at a senior level, which is how I interpreted the question, is that you've got to learn the business. That's just kind of a table stakes, but you also have to understand the culture as quickly as you can, because if you can't master the culture, you won't be successful. And I think that's the single biggest failure mode at a senior level, because you're making decisions at an organizational level, and if you don't understand how that organization thinks and operates, you're just going to struggle. And part of that cultural assimilation is learning how to work with a leadership team that in many cases has been there for a long time. Not always, but often has been in place, and they have norms and behaviors that you have to figure out how you can fit into. And I don't mean in some, I'm assuming those norms and behaviors are all perfectly okay, but you still have to figure out what they are. And I took a lot of time to try to watch and not overstep into things that I didn't understand reasonably well too quickly. Because I didn't want to erode credibility by getting out over my skis and kind of pretending that I knew more than I did, because I knew I didn't know enough. And that's kind of a scary place to be, because I think you all also have this tendency to want to hit the ground running and make a difference tomorrow, and show that you're making a contribution. And at a senior level, I think you got to be really careful not to over-contribute before you've really thought through whether what you're doing is a real contribution or if it's just to make you feel good. So I could go on about this, because I think it's something we're not taught to do, and I don't think some of these views I think would apply not at the most senior roles too, but even just moving into a bigger role or moving across groups. We don't teach people how to do that, and I think there's a lot of lost opportunity there in that transition process, because our training as lawyers hasn't really taught us to think this way about our career progression. So,
yeah, I think oftentimes too, when you're a woman or woman of color, to be the first to do something in a role, there's all that added pressure to want to do exactly what you're describing. I need to know my stuff. I need to be impressive. I need to, I want them to hire another black person, and if I don't do this right, they'll never hire another one, right? Like, you go through all of these things in your mind, but to your point, you have to be, I think, willing to receive and accept that you don't know everything and you won't know everything, which is not something that I don't think we always do well. Did you?
I have one more question.
Oh,
I want to make sure that we include our virtual people in this discussion.
great.
Okay, could some of you, could you speak to how you make risk calculations at your organization? How do you decide what issues are high, medium, low risk, and build policies around them? If one person could take that topic, that would be great.
Well, that's like my whole practice area. So I can talk to whoever that is, send them my way. We can talk about that all day. But yes, I will repeat the question. The question is, how do you calculate risk at your organization? Not personally within your career. Was about your organization? How do you make decisions?
How do you make decisions?
As a GC, how do you make decisions? How do you calculate risk? That's a great question. Anyone want to take that?
First, you have to know what the ultimate goal is. And once you've determined what that ultimate goal, then your job, just like with anything else in life, is to map out the best way to get there. And that may change, that goal may change weekly, sometimes daily. You know, you thought, okay, we were doing this for this reason to get to this common goal, but then circumstances change, and as we keep saying in this pandemic time, you have to pivot, right? So know what management needs. Know what is the best thing for the company. What is the best thing for the shareholders? What is the best thing, because I'm in an agricultural arena, what is the best thing to make sure that the environment is secure? And then how do you get to that goal? So it's a constant assessment of what is necessary.
And I would just add, I think, something Kate said earlier, just about knowing the company culture and getting to know, the other senior managers. You need to know what the risk level of the company is as well. Some companies may be much more risk averse. It might depend on, the type of company. Is it public or private? Or, so you have to understand that, as well as your own risk level as a GC. Some GCs are more conservative, some are not, and try to work together to get to that point. You don't want to be overly conservative if you have a more, ambitious, let's say, company who is willing to take risks, because you don't want to always say no, but then also you want to be able to kind of strike that right balance and not take undue risks. So understanding the company culture, I think, is also kind of a really important aspect of being able to assess what risk level, the company would be comfortable with.
Great. Lori, do we have any other questions from the virtual or anyone in person? Oh, we have a hand over here. Is there a mic? You can yell and I'll repeat. Great. So I didn't hear your full name. I think you said Candace, but the question was generally around she's a GC now and potentially looking for new opportunities. Should she be focused on GC roles only, or are there other roles that maybe she could consider that are outside of the GC role?
Yeah, I think I'd love to identify fallacies in thinking. And Sean talked about essentially a version of this in the previous session, which is that there's somehow a per se ladder, or a ladder that's objectively the ladder that you need to climb, and that's what the inevitable next step needs to be, or somehow it's a personal failure that you didn't do it, or you're kind of giving up and taking a lesser career. That's just. I just implore all of you not to fall into that trap of thinking. I'll give you a different example. When I was a partner at Sidley I was at the firm for about a decade, and for a chunk of that time I was a partner. And I made a move out of the firm, from a very secure position that, it often is something that young law students aspire to and think that it's the pinnacle as you become a partner. And in many ways, it can be. And I took a job as the head of litigation at Honeywell, and my partners were horrified. Like, what the heck are you doing? First of all, the company was a wreck, so that's, was a factor. But also, they perceived it was perceived as a step down. That was the perception. I saw it as an opportunity. And it turned out, there was a risk there. I could have been wrong. But I thought to myself, well, what's the worst case scenario? I'll just go get another job. How bad could it be if it doesn't work out? I've got my law degree. I've got years of experience. I know how to do things. Someone is going to want to hire me to do something. So and this looks like if it goes really well, I might become the general counsel of that company. So I'm kind of taking a step down and over, but unleashing a different range of possibilities. And so even whether you're moving laterally within your company or you're even in your law firm by changing your practice, I think, to me, what I would always think about is, what can I learn? What are the things that this job will give me that are things that I don't know how to do today that I could learn to do? How am I going to broaden my skill set, my portfolio of capabilities? And also, how am I going to keep myself interested so that I want to have a long career? And sometimes it's really important to move just because you're stale and you're bored, and it's time to tackle something different. And those are all legitimate ways of thinking about it. So just my 2 cents on that topic.
Take a step down and become the GC of Apple. Not so bad, right?
Yeah, no, I was going to say that the brass ring, analogy really resonated with me. I think you definitely need to find your own brass ring, not have someone else's brass ring be your own, or think that you're peer pressured in going to a certain path. I love the advice to just go for a skill set, not necessarily for a title. Also, think about the people you're going to be with. Is the CEO of that company or your boss going to be somebody you can work with that you think will be that later mentor? We also talked a lot about networking and the fact that you're going to get your next job, from word of mouth as opposed to just giving your resume somewhere. So is that someone you think will be supportive of you in terms of your professional development? And, I had the same thing. I went back and forth between private sector and government. And when I was in the private sector for a while, and I told my parents I was going back to the government, they were like, what? You didn't go to Columbia and pay all this money to, not make any money anymore? But I wanted to go back into the government because I wanted, I was interested in the area of law that I was going to. I was going to the Copyright Office at the time. I wanted to be able to really dig deep into that area of the law. I started out as a senior counsel, ended up heading the whole agency. And if I had not taken that opportunity as a senior counsel, I would have never had the opportunity to head the office. But a lot of people were like, why are you going back into government? So I think really figuring out what is best for yourself and thinking that long game, and not necessarily, okay, I have to go to the next place that looks better than where I am now, is really important.
Here we go. No, 100% agree. I really think that you have to be confident in what your plan is, what your goal is, and the reasons why you are doing what you are doing. And it's not always about, the final next step. My dream job is next. Sometimes it's about what are the steps, right? There may be 10 steps before you get to that dream job, but as long as you are thinking about it and strategic about it to some degree and open to things that you might not have thought about, you will end up where you are supposed to be 100% of the time.
That's a wonderful way to end the panel. Thank you all so much. This has been wonderful.